She's not on the guest list. The woman whispered just loud enough for 3 tables to hear. And in a ballroom filled with crystal chandeliers and $200 plates of filet mignon, that sentence landed heavier than the music drifting from the string quartet near the marble staircase. Naomi Carter paused just inside the grand entrance of the Whitmore estate, her heels barely making a sound against the polished hardwood floors. The room stretched wide and golden beneath towering ceilings, white roses arranged in tall glass vases, servers in pressed black suits weaving quietly between guests holding champagne flutes. Everything about the wedding radiated elegance, money, and carefully curated perfection. Yet as Naomi stepped forward, something shifted, conversations softened, eyes flickered, and then one by one, people turned away, not rudely, not loudly, but with that subtle, practiced movement that said more than words ever could. Naomi had seen it before, the quick glance, the polite smile that never quite reached the eyes, the invisible line drawn without explanation. She wore a simple navy dress, tailored but understated, no designer logo, no glittering jewelry, just a thin gold bracelet and calm posture. She carried herself like someone used to rooms like this. Yet the room didn't return the favor. A tall man in a gray suit glanced at her invitation card, then at her face, then back at the card again as if something didn't add up. He nodded politely and stepped aside, but his eyes lingered longer than necessary. Naomi moved deeper into the ballroom, scanning the seating chart near the entrance. Names printed in elegant cursive: Whitmore, Caldwell, Harrington. She searched quietly, her fingers tracing down the list, until she realized her name wasn't there. Not under any table, not under any variation. She didn't react. She simply stepped aside, letting another couple lean in. The woman beside her whispered softly to her partner, "Maybe she's with catering." And they both moved away without another glance. Naomi walked toward the back of the room, choosing an empty chair near a small round table. A server approached briefly, then hesitated. His polite smile faltered. "Are you waiting for someone?" he asked gently. Naomi nodded once, calm, composed. "Yes," she said. And he stepped away, unsure. Across the room, laughter rose near the front where the bride's family gathered. Cameras flashed. Champagne glasses clinked. But around Naomi, the space remained strangely quiet, like an invisible bubble had formed around her presence. A young woman in a lavender dress approached as if about to sit beside her, but her mother lightly touched her arm, whispering something Naomi couldn't hear, and the young woman changed direction, choosing another seat instead. Naomi exhaled slowly, not in frustration, not in defeat, just in recognition. She had been in rooms like this before, where silence spoke louder than introductions, where assumptions formed faster than conversations, where people decided who belonged before asking a single question. The music shifted as the string quartet transitioned into a soft rendition of a classic love song. Guests began settling into their seats, anticipation building for the ceremony to begin, and Naomi remained seated quietly near the back, her hands folded gently in her lap, her eyes steady, her posture calm, as if she weren't waiting to be acknowledged, but rather waiting for something else entirely, something the rest of the room didn't yet understand. And near the front, just beyond the floral arch, the doors leading to the private corridor opened slightly, and the groom stepped inside, scanning the room for just a moment before everything began to change. Daniel Whitmore stepped just inside the corridor entrance, adjusting the cuff of his charcoal suit as he glanced toward the ballroom. The low hum of conversation drifted toward him like distant waves, but something about the room felt different, quieter than he expected, as if the energy had shifted before he even walked in. His best man, Lucas Bennett, leaned closer with a half grin, asking if he was ready. But Daniel barely heard him, his attention drawn past the floral arch, beyond the sea of pale pastel dresses and tailored tuxedos, toward the back corner where a single navy silhouette sat alone. Naomi Carter had not moved. Her posture remained composed, her eyes calm, yet the distance between her and the rest of the room felt measured, deliberate, like an invisible boundary drawn without permission. Daniel narrowed his gaze slightly, not in confusion but recognition. He had seen that quiet isolation before, not just in boardrooms or conferences, but in moments where assumptions traveled faster than truth. Near Naomi, two women in champagne-colored gowns approached the empty chairs beside her. One of them smiled politely before glancing at Naomi, then hesitated. Her smile faded just enough to be noticed, and she turned to her friend, suggesting they find seats closer to the front. They walked away, their heels clicking softly against the floor. Naomi remained still, her expression unchanged. A waiter passed by offering sparkling water to nearby guests, but skipped her table unintentionally. Realizing it a second later and circling back with an apologetic nod, Naomi accepted the glass with a quiet thank you, her voice steady and warm. The waiter smiled back, almost relieved, as though he expected something else but found calm instead. Near the seating chart, Margaret Whitmore, Daniel's mother, adjusted the arrangement cards with practiced precision, her pearl necklace catching the chandelier light. She scanned the room carefully, ensuring every guest appeared exactly where they belonged. Her eyes drifted briefly toward Naomi, and she paused, not recognizing the face. She turned slightly toward a coordinator and whispered something discreet. The coordinator nodded and began flipping through a tablet, searching for a name that did not appear. Across the ballroom, the bride, Emily Whitmore, laughed softly with her bridesmaids. Unaware of the subtle tension forming near the back, photographers tested their lenses, capturing warm golden tones. Everything appeared perfect on the surface, yet Naomi's quiet presence lingered like a question nobody wanted to ask. Daniel took a slow step forward. Lucas noticed the shift and followed his gaze. "Do you know her?" Lucas asked quietly. Daniel did not answer immediately. Instead, he watched as Naomi gently adjusted her bracelet, her movements calm, patient, as if she had all the time in the world. And in that moment, Daniel remembered a different room years earlier, a smaller space with folding chairs and fluorescent lights, where Naomi had once sat quietly before speaking words that changed the direction of his life. He exhaled slowly, the memory settling in, while behind him, the wedding planner signaled that the ceremony would begin in 5 minutes. Guests were guided to their seats, soft music swelled, and still Naomi remained alone at the back, unnoticed by most, misunderstood by many. Yet Daniel's focus did not shift away from her, because he understood something the rest of the room did not yet see. And as he took another step forward, the calm rhythm of the evening began to lean toward a moment none of them were expecting. Guests began settling into their seats as the soft music shifted into a slower melody, and the gentle hum of conversation gradually faded into polite anticipation. Naomi Carter remained seated at the back, her glass of sparkling water resting untouched beside her, while nearby tables filled with laughter, introductions, and the quiet shuffle of programs being opened. Yet around her the space still felt slightly distant, as though the evening had drawn a careful circle around her presence. A middle-aged man in a navy blazer approached her table briefly, glancing at the empty chairs, then at Naomi, his smile polite but uncertain. He asked if anyone was sitting there, and before she could answer, he noticed someone waving from another table and excused himself quickly, leaving the chair empty once again. Naomi watched calmly, her expression composed, her shoulders relaxed, as if she had already accepted the rhythm of the room. Near the front, Margaret Whitmore continued scanning the seating arrangement, her eyes narrowing slightly as she noticed Naomi still seated at the back. She turned to the wedding coordinator once more, her voice low but firm. The coordinator nodded again and walked toward Naomi with measured steps, her clipboard held close. She offered a polite smile and asked Naomi if she could confirm her name. Naomi answered gently, "Naomi Carter." The coordinator checked her list again, her brows knitting briefly. Then she nodded politely and said she would double-check. Stepping away with quiet uncertainty, Naomi did not react. She simply folded her hands again, her calm steady as ever. A young bridesmaid passing by glanced at Naomi and then at the empty chairs. Her expression softened for a moment as if she considered sitting, but another bridesmaid called her name, and she turned away. Across the ballroom, Daniel Whitmore continued watching, his attention unwavering. Lucas leaned closer again and whispered that the ceremony would begin any second. But Daniel still did not move, because something about Naomi sitting alone felt louder than the music, louder than the chatter, louder than the entire carefully arranged evening. He remembered how she always carried that same quiet confidence, even in rooms where she had every reason to speak louder. Near Naomi's table, Two older guests approached, their conversation pausing as they noticed her. One of them gave a polite nod, but the other whispered something softly, and they both chose another table. Naomi lowered her gaze briefly, not in discomfort, but in reflection, her mind drifting for just a moment to another evening years earlier, another formal gathering where she had been mistaken for staff before anyone learned her name. She remembered how she had stayed calm then too, how patience often revealed more than explanations ever could. The music softened further as the officiant stepped quietly into position near the floral arch, signaling that the ceremony was about to begin. Guests turned forward. Conversations faded. Chairs adjusted. Naomi remained seated at the back, her posture still composed, her presence still quiet. Yet across the room, Daniel finally took a step forward, his expression thoughtful, his eyes still locked on Naomi. And as he moved closer to the aisle, the calm elegance of the evening continued, unaware that the quietest presence in the room was about to become the center of everything. Daniel Whitmore moved slowly toward the aisle, his polished shoes barely making a sound against the hardwood floor, while the final guests adjusted in their seats, the soft glow of chandelier light reflecting across white linens and crystal glasses. Naomi Carter remained seated at the back, her calm presence unchanged, yet the subtle tension around her seemed to deepen as the ceremony prepared to begin. Margaret Whitmore noticed Daniel stepping out of position earlier than expected and watched him carefully, her expression tightening slightly. She followed his line of sight and once again saw Naomi sitting alone, her posture straight, her expression composed. Margaret leaned toward the wedding coordinator and spoke quietly, her tone polite but firm. The coordinator nodded and approached Naomi once more, this time with a slightly more cautious smile. She gently asked Naomi if she might prefer to move closer to the back entrance to make room for additional family members. Naomi looked up calmly, her eyes steady, and replied softly that she was comfortable where she was. The coordinator hesitated, then nodded politely and stepped away, though uncertainty lingered in her expression. Nearby, two guests seated at the adjacent table exchanged glances. One of them whispered that perhaps Naomi had arrived at the wrong event. The other nodded subtly, and both turned their attention forward. Naomi folded her hands again, her breathing slow and steady, her composure untouched. The music shifted into the opening notes, signaling that the ceremony would begin. Guests leaned forward slightly, anticipation building, but Daniel did not take his place immediately. Instead, he paused. Near the aisle, his gaze still fixed toward the back, Lucas Bennett stepped beside him, whispering that everyone was waiting. But Daniel barely responded, because memories were unfolding in his mind with quiet clarity. He remembered a rainy afternoon 8 years earlier, sitting in a small community center after losing his first job, his confidence shaken, his future uncertain. And Naomi Carter had walked into that room, wearing the same calm expression she wore now. She had listened more then. She spoke, and when she finally offered guidance, her words had shifted his direction entirely. She had introduced him to opportunities he had never imagined, encouraged him to continue when doubt nearly stopped him, and quietly supported him without ever asking for recognition. Daniel exhaled slowly, the memory settling deeply as he looked at her now, sitting alone in a room filled with people who did not know her name. Across the ballroom, Margaret noticed Daniel's hesitation and stepped slightly forward, her smile polite but questioning. Emily Whitmore stood near the front, unaware of the subtle shift unfolding behind the scenes. Photographers adjusted their lenses, the officiant waited patiently, and still Naomi remained seated quietly at the back, her calm unwavering, her presence almost invisible to most. Yet to Daniel she stood out more than anyone else in the room. And as he took another deliberate step toward the aisle, the quiet elegance of the wedding began to shift, toward a moment that would soon change the atmosphere entirely. The officiant cleared his throat gently as the music softened to a near whisper, and guests shifted in their seats, turning their attention toward the floral arch where the ceremony was about to begin. But Daniel Whitmore still had not taken his position, and that subtle delay began to ripple quietly through the front rows. Margaret Whitmore noticed first, her composed smile tightening slightly as she leaned toward Lucas Bennett and asked in a low voice if everything was all right. Lucas offered a polite nod, but his eyes followed Daniel, who remained just off the aisle, his gaze still drawn toward the back of the ballroom, where Naomi Carter sat quietly, unaware that the entire evening was beginning to tilt toward her presence. Near Naomi, the wedding coordinator returned once more, this time accompanied by a young usher, holding a stack of programs. The coordinator's smile remained polite but carried a trace of urgency. She gently explained that seating adjustments were being made for immediate family members and asked if Naomi might be willing to relocate to a chair near the rear entrance. Naomi looked at her calmly, her expression unchanged, her voice soft but steady as she replied that she was comfortable and preferred to remain where she was. The coordinator hesitated, glancing briefly toward Margaret at the front, then nodded and stepped back, though her uncertainty remained visible. Two guests seated nearby exchanged quiet whispers, one of them suggesting that perhaps Naomi had entered the wrong reception. The other nodded slightly, their eyes flickering toward her before turning forward again. Naomi folded her hands in her lap, her calm unbroken, yet her mind drifted for a moment to another gathering years earlier, a formal banquet where she had also been asked to move to the back, not because of any mistake, but because assumptions had spoken before introductions. She remembered choosing silence then as well, allowing the moment to unfold naturally. Across the ballroom, Daniel's expression softened with recognition. He remembered those moments too, remembered how Naomi had always met discomfort with patience rather than confrontation, how she believed that dignity often spoke louder than defense. Emily Whitmore shifted slightly near the front, glancing toward Daniel with a curious smile. Unaware of the quiet tension building, photographers adjusted their cameras, capturing the elegant stillness of the room. But the subtle delay had grown noticeable. Guests began glancing around, wondering what was causing the pause. Daniel finally stepped forward slightly, though he still did not take his place, his eyes never leaving Naomi, because in a room filled with hundreds of carefully arranged details, she remained the one presence that mattered most. And as the quiet murmurs softened again and the officiant prepared to begin, the calm rhythm of the ceremony hovered in suspension, as though the entire evening was waiting for a moment that had not yet arrived. The quiet pause stretched longer than anyone expected, and the soft melody from the string quartet began to feel less like background music and more like a placeholder for something unfinished. Daniel Whitmore finally stepped into the aisle, but instead of taking his position beneath the floral arch, he stopped halfway, his shoulders relaxed yet his posture deliberate. The movement drew attention slowly. First from Lucas Bennett, who stood beside him, then from Margaret Whitmore, whose composed smile began to tighten as she realized Daniel was not following the planned sequence. Guests shifted slightly in their seats, whispers barely audible as the room sensed the change. Naomi Carter remained seated at the back, her calm presence unchanged, though she noticed the subtle movement as Daniel paused, her eyes lifting briefly toward him, their gaze meeting across the distance for just a second. And in that moment, Daniel's expression softened. With quiet certainty, near the front, the officiant glanced politely toward Daniel, offering a gentle nod as if inviting him to proceed. But Daniel remained still, his attention focused beyond the front rows, across the tables, toward the solitary navy silhouette seated alone. Margaret leaned slightly toward the wedding planner, whispering quietly, her voice composed but edged with concern. The planner nodded and stepped forward as if preparing to gently prompt Daniel, but Lucas placed a subtle hand on her arm, signaling to wait. Because Daniel's stillness was not hesitation, it was intention. Naomi watched quietly, her breathing slow and steady, unaware of the quiet ripples spreading through the room. Two guests seated near her exchanged curious glances, one of them whispering that perhaps something unexpected had happened. The other leaned forward slightly, watching Daniel more closely across the ballroom. Emily Whitmore smiled politely, though confusion flickered briefly across her expression as she followed Daniel's gaze. Photographers adjusted their cameras instinctively, sensing an unscripted moment unfolding. The room grew quieter, the anticipation shifting from ceremony to curiosity. Daniel finally took another step forward, but instead of continuing toward the arch, he turned slightly, facing the guests, his movement subtle yet unmistakable. The string quartet softened their playing, unsure whether to continue, and the entire ballroom seemed to lean into the moment. Naomi remained still, her calm unwavering, her hands folded gently in her lap, her posture dignified. Unaware that the focus of the evening was slowly moving toward her, Daniel drew a slow breath, his expression thoughtful, the memory of years past settling firmly in his mind. He remembered Naomi's steady voice guiding him when he had doubted himself, remembered her quiet support when opportunities seemed distant, and now, seeing her seated alone in a room filled with people who did not know her story, he felt the weight of the moment. Margaret noticed the shift and straightened slightly, her expression composed but alert. Guests leaned forward subtly, sensing something important was about to unfold, and as Daniel stood there in the center of the aisle, the elegant calm of the evening held its breath, waiting for the quiet moment that was about to change everything. Daniel Whitmore lifted his hand slightly, signaling the musicians to pause, and the final notes of the quartet faded into a quiet stillness that settled across the ballroom like a held breath. Guests shifted in their seats, their attention now fully drawn to him. Emily Whitmore watched with gentle curiosity, her smile soft but uncertain, while Margaret Whitmore straightened subtly. Sensing that this moment was no longer following the carefully arranged plan, Daniel glanced briefly toward Emily, offering a reassuring nod, then turned his gaze across the room, past the front tables, beyond the center aisle, until his eyes found Naomi Carter sitting quietly at the back, her posture calm, her expression composed. She did not yet realize that the entire room had begun to follow his gaze. One by one, guests turned their heads, curiosity spreading like a ripple. Naomi noticed the shift gradually, her eyes lifting as she realized the attention drifting toward her direction. Daniel took a slow breath, his voice steady and warm as he spoke. "Before we begin, there is something I need to do." His words carried gently through the quiet room, not loud, not dramatic, but deliberate enough to hold every ear. The officiant stepped back respectfully, giving Daniel space. Photographers raised their cameras instinctively, sensing a moment beyond the planned ceremony. Daniel continued, "There is someone here tonight who changed the direction of my life long before this day ever arrived." The room remained still. Guests exchanged quiet glances, trying to understand. Naomi remained seated, her calm expression unchanged though her eyes narrowed slightly in quiet curiosity. Daniel's gaze never left her. "Years ago, when I had nothing but uncertainty and doubt, this person saw something in me that I could not yet see in myself." He paused briefly, the silence deepening. Margaret watched closely, her expression thoughtful now. Emily's curiosity softened into understanding as she followed Daniel's gaze. Daniel took one small step forward, then spoke again, his voice steady. "She taught me that dignity speaks louder than titles, and that patience reveals truth in its own time." Naomi's breath slowed slightly, recognition beginning to settle. In her eyes, Daniel's expression softened further, and then he said the words that shifted the entire room. "Naomi Carter." Her name moved quietly through the air, yet it carried weight, like a key unlocking something unseen. Guests turned fully now, searching for her. Whispers softened into silence as Naomi realized every eye was now directed toward her. She remained seated for a moment, her composure steady, her expression calm, yet touched with quiet surprise. Daniel offered a gentle smile across the distance, and the room waited, unaware that the quietest presence in the ballroom had just become the center of everything. Naomi Carter remained seated for a moment after hearing her name, the room silent except for the faint hum of air conditioning and the soft rustle of fabric as guests turned fully toward her. She lifted her eyes slowly, her expression calm, yet touched with quiet recognition. Daniel Whitmore's gentle smile remained steady across the distance, inviting but never demanding. Naomi placed her hands lightly on the edge of her chair and stood with composed grace, her navy dress falling neatly as she rose, the movement subtle yet commanding. And as she stepped forward, the quiet ripple of attention followed her. Guests who had barely noticed her minutes earlier now leaned slightly in their seats, their curiosity shifting into something deeper. Margaret Whitmore watched carefully, her expression transitioning from uncertainty to thoughtful awareness. Emily Whitmore smiled softly, her eyes warm as she observed Naomi walking toward the aisle. The path opened naturally as guests adjusted their chairs, creating space without being asked. Naomi walked calmly, her posture steady, her pace unhurried, as though she had always belonged in the center of the room. Daniel waited halfway down the aisle, his expression respectful. As Naomi approached, he spoke again, his voice gentle yet clear. Years ago, when I did not know where my life was headed, Naomi Carter gave me more than advice. She gave me opportunity. Guests listened closely now, the earlier whispers replaced by attentive silence. Daniel continued. She believed in me when my resume was short, when my confidence was uncertain, and when I had more questions than answers. Naomi stopped a few steps away from him, her expression calm, her eyes reflecting quiet humility. Daniel turned slightly to address the guests. What many of you do not know is that Naomi Carter is the founder of the Carter Leadership Foundation, the program that helped me earn my first internship, the program that guided me through graduate school, and the program that quietly supported hundreds of young professionals across this city. A soft murmur moved through the room as recognition began to spread. Daniel continued gently. And what even fewer people know is that when Emily and I struggled to plan this day, Naomi offered something we never expected. Emily stepped forward slightly, her smile warm, her eyes shining with gratitude. Daniel looked at Naomi again, then spoke softly. She made this wedding possible. The words settled into the room with quiet weight. Guests exchanged glances, surprise visible across several faces. Daniel added, not for recognition, not for attention, but because she believed in celebrating new beginnings. Naomi's expression softened, her eyes calm, her posture unchanged. The earlier distance between her and the room dissolved as understanding replaced assumption, and in that moment the elegant ballroom, once filled with quiet judgment, shifted into a space of recognition, as the woman who had quietly sat alone became the reason the entire evening existed. The quiet murmur that followed Daniel's words settled into a warm stillness as Naomi Carter stood beside him, the chandelier light reflecting softly across the polished floor. Emily Whitmore stepped forward with a gentle smile, her eyes filled with gratitude as she reached Naomi. She placed her hands lightly over Naomi's and spoke softly, thanking her not just for the wedding but for the guidance she had offered throughout their journey. Naomi responded with a calm nod, her expression humble, her voice gentle as she told Emily that celebrating love was always worth the effort. The guests watched closely, their earlier assumptions dissolving into quiet reflection. Margaret Whitmore stepped forward next, her composed demeanor softened. She offered Naomi a respectful smile, her voice sincere as she thanked her for supporting Daniel when their family had not yet known the path he would take. Naomi accepted the gesture gracefully, her calm presence steady. Daniel turned once more toward the guests, his voice warm. Sometimes the most important people in our lives are the ones who never ask for recognition. He paused briefly, allowing the words to settle. Naomi taught me that dignity does not need attention. It only needs consistency. The room remained still, guests listening carefully. Daniel continued. Tonight is not just about Emily and me. It is about the people who believed in us when the future was uncertain. He gestured gently toward Naomi, and a soft wave of applause began near the front rows, gradually spreading through the ballroom. Naomi's expression remained composed, though her eyes reflected quiet appreciation. The earlier distance between her and the guests had completely vanished. The same people who had avoided her now watched with respect, the atmosphere warm and unified. Daniel then took his place beside Emily. The officiant stepped forward once more. The ceremony resumed with renewed meaning. Guests listened with deeper attention. The vows exchanged beneath the floral arch felt more personal, more grounded, as though the evening had shifted from formality to sincerity. Naomi returned to her seat near the front after Emily gently invited her forward. A small but meaningful gesture. She sat calmly, her presence now welcomed, her quiet dignity unchanged. As the ceremony concluded and the newly married couple walked down the aisle, the applause rose again. The string quartet resumed their music, and the ballroom filled with warmth. Naomi watched with a gentle smile, her calm steady as always, and in that elegant space, the lesson lingered quietly in the air, that true influence does not announce itself. It reveals itself in moments of patience, and that the quietest person in the room can sometimes be the reason everything exists.